French Open show, our second edition, as we look towards the mystique of the Roland Garros Grand Slam leading into the grass court season. Of course, it is the closest slams together. The French Open followed by Wimbledon. We've been rolling through Spain and Italy and France and preparing for this event. There will be plenty of Aussies there. It's not always the happiest of hunting grounds. Ash Barty did win it a few years ago, of course, but probably tempered expectations this time around. Darren Parkin is my name. I've got Steve Quick from Ace Previews alongside me. And Steve, it is the mysterious slam, if you will, that mystique around the clay court season, and with it comes its own sort of unique beauty, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a funny old little period, I think, for a lot of Australian tennis players in particular. Some of them it's the road to the grass courts and the very short season that follows. But look, it's been an interesting, I think, couple of months, particularly for the men's tour in terms of the markets and what we can talk about today for what's going to be a big fortnight of tennis.
A lot of players injured, a lot of players with clouds hanging over their head, and generally the French Open, when we previewed it for more than a decade, it's been one-way traffic. It's now more the women's draw that is that way this time, and the men's draw is quite open. And one of the major reasons for that, I think he deserves to be spoken about first because he owns this tournament, and it may well be the last time that we introduce him for this. But Rafa, he's won the tournament. No one's dominated a tournament quite like he's dominated this one. Clearly, his lead-up form shows that his body is starting to fail him. We know that the sand is running out of the hourglass, but it'll be terrific to see him go around again, even if expectations are very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at just the way that some of his opponents the last couple of weeks have just responded to just being able to play him on clay or to be able to play him at this stage of his career, asking for his shirt and those kind of things. You can see the respect that he commands across the rest of the tour as well. But yeah, look, it'll be interesting to see how he goes. He's struggled a little bit through the best of three format, across the course of this year, and even the lead up to the Australian Open there, had that match with Jordan Thompson and then didn't play the Australian Open. So it's going to be tough, I think, for him. But he's going to be a tough matchup, particularly in the first week for some of the lower ranked players.
We'll look at the market shortly, but we'll assess the lead-up form first of all. So Tsitsipas and Ruud, who have been finalists in the last few years at the French Open, they met in back-to-back finals, Monte Carlo and Barcelona. Ruud was here in the decider as recently as last year. Andrei Rublev beating Auger Aliassime in Madrid. Felix, a bit of a charmed run there with some withdrawals, as we know. And the Italian Open is currently on as we speak. But what have you made of the lead-up form for the men?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because we're so used to, again, having... it was Nadal for so long, and even Alcaraz, and Djokovic, we're so used to having these lead-ups dominated by one or a combination of those players. So it has been nice to have that little bit of variety. I think Casper Ruud's probably the most interesting one. I think, up until a couple of weeks ago, he's basically been considered a ATP 250 winner. He hasn't been able to take that next leap. He's been able to make a lot of finals, but hasn't been able to perform, at that top level. But his ability and, he's tried to be a little bit more aggressive this year in particular, I think has really helped him out in terms of being able to match it with the top players. But it's going to be largely, I think, contingent on the draw here, considering the injury concerns that we have about some of the top players in the market.
Women's draw, opposite side of the equation. Once the draw is released, we'll know a little bit more. But in the lead-up, so Danielle Collins having a very good few months. She also claimed that the Charleston title. Swiatek and Sabalenka, who were always going to be at the top of the discussion, played a terrific final in Madrid that went 7-6 in the third. Rybakina won Stuttgart, but hasn't been all that well around that. So what have you made of the girls?
Yeah, again, it's probably that big 3 to 4 players again, but obviously dominated by Swiatek at the top there. She's going to be incredibly tough to beat. I think it's one of those ones you're going to need everything to go right. But we might talk a little bit about how the draw could match up and some players to maybe be aware of as to where they're placed. But, Sabalenka, I was really impressed with that level, I think, in Madrid to be able to push, the world number one to the brink there. But, Danielle Collins has obviously looked a lot better since she's announced her retirement. Charleston's probably not the same as that, the clay in Paris we're going to see there. But again, is one of those players who, when she can redline and play her best tennis, it's going to be, she's going to be a tough out across the course of the fortnight.
Yeah, and she's a real competitor. We saw her at the Australian Open,
Yep.
lose a match that she really should have won, was in complete control of that matchup
Yep.
with Iga.
I was on her that one, so
Yeah,
that's I certainly haven't forgotten that one.
and even in the Australian Open final, when she played
Yep.
Ash, she was in a good position in the second set.
Yep.
Shows that she can put herself right in the frame for those. Now, normally at this stage of a show, we look at our favourite memories of the tournament. We're going to do things a little bit differently. Carl did this with me on the AFL version of Trade Talk. It's blind ranking, so it's a little bit of an unfair segment, but I'll throw 5 names at you, but you don't know what the next one's going to be, and you have to rank them 1 to 5. I'm going to do this twice, so the men's winners and women's winners. I will put a disclaimer on this saying that I haven't put Nadal, Djokovic or Federer in this, so you don't have to wait for one of those names to pop up and keep the one spot vacant.
So I won't get abused on social media.
No, you won't get abused. Well, you might, but
maybe it
would be less fair, I think. So our 5 men's winners. Winner number 1, Gustavo Kuerten.
Ooh. I'll go 3.
Mats Wilander.
Oh. 2.
Stan Wawrinka.
I'm going to apologise in advance for whoever ends up number 5, but I'll go 4 for Stan. So I've got 1 and 5 left, don't I?
Yeah, Jim Courier.
I have to stitch up Jim, am I? What's worse, leaving 5 free at the end or 1? We'll go 5 for Jim.
Carlos Moya.
Oh, that's all right. We can go with the Spaniard.
We can go with that.
Number 1. Yeah, let's go with that.
He stayed in the game.
He's still involved.
Women's side of the draw. I'll throw an interesting dilemma at you first up. And again, no Serena Williams, no Steffi Graf in this list, so you don't have to wait for them. Iga Swiatek. We could put a disclaimer on where she is now, not where she might be.
Yeah, okay. We'll go. Let's go 2.
Maria Sharapova.
Ooh. 4.
Lena.
5.
I think you've ranked that right, because I don't think you can lose on the next 2 wherever you put them.
Okay.
Justine Henin.
Oh. 3.
I think that's okay. Monica Seles.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
I think you've done a pretty good
number
job
1
out of that. Yeah, I think you shouldn't cop.
It could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse.
You could have copped a bit of abuse with that, but I think you've come out of it pretty well. We look at the markets now, and we'll start with the men's market. So Carlos Alcaraz at the time of talking, 345. Djokovic concussed in the most bizarre of circumstances, 420. Jannik Sinner, the Australian Open champion, at $5.40. Then you go down to Rafa at $12.50. It kind of feels like with Rafa, as great as he is, you could write your own ticket in a lot of respects. And then on the next line of betting, you're looking at Tsitsipas, Zverev, Ruud, all around that $12 to $14 mark, somewhere in there. How are you seeing it? And then I guess beyond that, any value?
Yeah, so looking at it at the moment, so we've got those top 4 players. We've got Alcaraz, Djokovic, Sinner, and Nadal. So Alcaraz has his injury concerns. It'd be nice to see him on court and playing a little bit if you're going to be getting involved with, $3.40, $3.50 for a 2-week tournament, best of 5 sets. Novak, again, obviously he did get the concussion and the hit on the head there.
With a water bottle for those who might not have noticed.
So it's a bit of a tricky one. Again, you'd probably like to see him through that first week. I think his advantage compared to the others is, if he's feeling okay physically, yes, he hasn't played a lot of tennis in the lead up, but he's one of those players that is so far and away above the majority of the field that's unseeded that he can build some rhythm and be able to kind of find his game across the course of the first week. He's got a little bit of room to move. Rafael Nadal, the $12.50. I mean, I feel like I nearly wrote him off a couple of years ago at the Australian Open when he then went on that run that no one really expected. But it's hard to make a strong case just on the way that he's looked late in some matches. He hasn't looked that dominant self, and it's hard to see him physically being able to back up from, if he gets pushed to 4 or 5 sets. So I really think this is one of those opportunities, and you think about it, Sinner injured as well. The next one's on the line of betting, so Casper Ruud, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Alexander Zverev. This is I don't want to say it's their last opportunity, but this is a massive opportunity for the 3 of them in particular, given the state of those top 4 players. So I wrote a couple of months ago a piece that was up on the hub around Casper Ruud and Zverev in particular as trading options. Looking at them at the moment, they probably look about right, but it's probably trying to figure out, if you can get one of those, you know, you want to obviously be away from Alcaraz and Novak in particular. It's tricky with Nadal because we don't know where he's going to pop up in the draw. It's that part of being unseeded.
Protected ranking of 9, I think, for the French, or protected seeding potentially.
So we need to be careful, obviously, with that. But I think looking at the players, the next one's down the list. Medvedev's had his own injury concerns the last couple of weeks, but has looked a little bit better on the clay. Holger Rune, it's hard to think. Personally, I find it difficult to trust him at the moment. If we're 4 hours deep into a match, it's deep, late in the fifth set, to be able to have that concentration and fitness to be able to, push over the line and then be able to back up and, be competitive again, match after match. Rublev has been up and down, particularly since his default a couple of months ago. Just continues to look angry and really difficult. It's a difficult watch, I think, if you're ever on Rublev in any capacity. It's never going to be particularly comfortable. And then from there, it's a mixture of players that, look, they might be able to upset one of those top players, but I think, looking at the three that I'm going to be more interested in for the draw, it's going to be that Ruud, Tsitsipas, Zverev. In terms of their ability, we know they can play best of 5. We know that they can steady the ship if they do fall down early, and they're capable, and they've made deep runs here before.
You posed the question, to put back on you, in terms of last chance. Now, we've spoken a lot about the end of the top line era, which is clearly coming. Federer's gone, Nadal's nearly there, and Djokovic is 37 this year, so clearly that's coming. But Alcaraz is considered to be the heir apparent who will sweep through and dominate. Jannik Sinner's quite young. Tsitsipas, I think he's 25, wouldn't be particularly old. Casper Ruud and Zverev have been around maybe a year or two longer, potentially. I wouldn't say last chance, but is it getting there?
It's a massive opportunity, I think, in this instance, when you consider those players, like those three that I mentioned, they're not great on grass. It's probably not going to be their go there. And if you think about the quality that Alcaraz and Sinner are producing across hard court and clay, I think they're going to be able to get your way to a Grand Slam in the next couple of years. You're going to need to find your way through those two, and that's before you think about Holger Rune and some other players that are going to be able to challenge. I think it's still a pretty big two that's going to be tough, because they've been able to break through early. They know what to do. They know what it feels like to win the Grand Slam. Now it's their opportunity to kind of go and turn 1 into 2 into 3 into 4 pretty quickly. And
Medvedev is the interesting floater in that, who's made 5 or 6 finals now, and he's a guy who technically has broken through because he's regularly a part of that conversation. But and look, Andy Murray wasn't, because if you look at Andy Murray, he was the victim of the fact that, the only players that have ever beaten him in finals are Djokovic and Federer, so he's very unlucky. And Medvedev has lost to Nadal and Djokovic and now Sinner as well. So you can be unlucky with when you come through, but do you still feel this potential, not so much on clay for Medvedev, but particularly on hard courts, US Open here in Australia, where he might be able to turn his current 1-5 record into maybe winning 5 slams somewhere in his career?
Yeah, I think he's still going to be thereabouts for the next number of years. But I think, particularly for those players that haven't broken through yet, you could put Rublev in that, but I just think Rublev's that tier below, just because at Grand Slam level we haven't seen him. At that last weekend, that last 4 players, we're not seeing him there consistently. So I think for those players in particular, Zverev obviously came really close with Dominic Thiem, and that interrupted the US Open in 2020. Tsitsipas has been 2 sets to love up in a final at Roland Garros against Novak. Amongst some other pretty strong efforts. Casper Ruud's obviously made finals. I think for them to break through, it may not be their last opportunity, but it might be their best.
Yeah, I think. And Casper Ruud last year looked like winning the first set of the final, which he needed to do, but it didn't fall that way. Women's markets, Swiatek, who's been the dominant force at Roland Garros, at $1.96. Sabalenka, $6.60. You then look at Goff, who's a slam winner now. Rybakina, who's around about the double-figure mark. They've been the top 4 of probably the markets of the last 3 or 4 slams across the world. How you're seeing that? Clearly, Iga is very short. So how do you play either her or around her?
Yeah, look, it's a tricky game to play
Mm.
to find value when it's a 128 player market and we've got someone who's sub $2. Look, I think it's going to be really important looking at the draw here, and particularly for trading options outside of those four. I think you've mentioned as well that if you can find yourself in a pocket with if Rabarkin is still, we're not sure, she's been unwell, hasn't played a lot of tennis, and even Coco's struggled a little bit on serve and hasn't looked great through the last couple of weeks of tennis. If you can find yourself in a pocket with them away from Iga, I think there's going to be some potential for some real trading value here. I don't think I'm not in the position to be confidently laying, Iga at the $2 mark there. I think that's probably about right based on what we've seen. Sabalenka did push her in Madrid. That was at altitude, probably some better conditions for Sabalenka. But I think what I would be really interested to be aware of with Swiatek is that draw and how that looks in the first, within her quarter in particular. If she finds herself in a spot where there's Yelena Ostapenko, even a Danielle Collins who has, pushed her in the past, those big hitters who have the ability to take the racket out of her hands just for even, it's not going to be the whole match, but for parts of it to be able to frustrate her. I think they're the ones who have that ability to be able to be that one to knock her off. I don't know if they're going to be the ones who can win 7 matches to win the tournament, but I think it's going to be really important to look at the draw and see where she places compared to the likes of Ostapenko.
Might do that as a nice transition into a segue where we like to do a bit of education for punters out there as well. So looking at some of those markets to reach quarters, or in the quarter of the draw that you just spoke about then, you look at someone like Rublev, who's made 7, 8, maybe 9 quarterfinals at Grand Slam level, but that appears to be his ceiling. You look at the women's side of the draw, and if you think there's a dominant force at the top, you might look at some of those quarters betting, thinking, well, they might win their quarter, they'll shorten, you can, trade in and out and that type of thing. Can you take us through that strategy around looking at the quarters markets and how you can play that around your big picture tournament bets?
Yeah, so you can basically treat it, there's a couple of different ways. So using Rublev as an example, I think Rublev's been a great example of being able to bet into him to win a quarter, but you may be not as confident about him betting to win outright. So there are going to be different odds. You might find yourself in the outright market, looking at Rublev and going, we've got $60, $70 for him to win the tournament. But we come to the 4th round and he's still $60 to $70 because all the other top players, they've all won through. They're all looking confident. Rublev's maybe won in a 5th set or, had a couple of close encounters along the way. So, those players that you think might not be able to get over the hump of that making the making the final and just getting to that final 4. Casper Ruud's another example in the past. Those ones who you think, just not sure if they're going to be able to get over that line. They can present those opportunities within the quarters. And I think it's also looking at, not necessarily for Roland Garros, but we might look ahead to Wimbledon, for example, and look at, if you find yourself in a pocket of the draw where Casper Ruud's the top seed, hasn't been strong on grass overall, you might be able to find a pocket where you could maybe look to trade either in the outright market or look at the quarter markets to win, thinking that I can knock off Casper Ruud and then take that seeded path through. It's all about looking at the dynamic of, with the quarter. So we've got 32 players, where they're going to play. You look at the other players and go, they've got a tougher challenge in round 2 and 3, whereas my player might be able to coast through and my next challenge is round 4, that you can look to work with that and find an opportunity to back to lay or just back and hold all the way through to the money match in the quarterfinals.
It sounds obvious, but how imperative is it with that to wait for a draw? Because people might look at it and go, expecting to make a quarter because he's a gun or whatever.
Yeah.
But you might look at it and go, Iga Swiatek's had problems with Ostapenko occasionally. There she is, she's in her quarter. That's a bit dangerous. Those sorts of things. Yeah,
and look, the liquidity with those markets is going to increase as we get to the start of the tournament, and then through the early rounds. So the good thing with those things is, in round 2 or 3, you can still jump in to those markets and get involved once you've got a site. You might be able to look at it and go, well, Alcaraz has come out with strapping on his elbow, hasn't looked particularly great. Maybe I can see, Alexander Zverev's going to be the first main seed to challenge him. I think, he looks a little bit vulnerable. I might be able to take Zverev, for a little back to lay in the outright market and just a smaller back in the the quarter market might be a play. It's all going to come down largely to the draw and where things, pan out. But we'll be able to put some content up on the hub and particularly after the draw and see what's available.
The draw is not too far away. We'll branch into the Aussies now before we just take a look at some of the betting strategies to close it out. It's the highest number of Aussie men in 25 years to receive direct entry into the French Open. In terms of the chances, we know it is tempered, but Alex de Minaur beat Rafa in a lead-up, made the quarters in Monte Carlo. Hasn't loved clay historically. Then you look at Jordan Thompson, 33 in the world, has enjoyed one of his better seasons. He's 29 this year, so in the latter or back end of his career. Alexi Poprin, 44, capable of lots of things, but can be a bit enigmatic. Chris O'Connell had a bit of an injury niggle in the last week or so, got to 58, Vukic 65. Max Purcell's obviously enjoyed one of the better singles runs. Kokonakis had a pretty good run last year, lost to Hashanov in a game which he was right in. Rinky Hijikata at 77. So there's a few that are making good ranking progress, but in terms of this tournament, as you said, there's probably a bit of an eye to when the orange becomes green, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, de Minaur did beat Rafa.
Mm-hmm.
Rafa 2024 is probably not the same as Rafa 2018. It's hard to make a case just because I feel like, and we saw it with Echeverry last year, if he gets a player against him, across the net who can hit big, can hit him off the court, can keep him on the move, I just don't know if he has the weapons to be able to hit back through consistently. Of the rest, look, I'm probably more interested in de Minaur, but also Jordan Thompson, come Wimbledon time, being able to really challenge on the grass there. I think, they have capabilities to be competitive, I think, in rounds 1 or 2, but I'm not sure we're going to be seeing too many of them come week 2 of this tournament.
And on the women's side, look, our best chances post the Vardy era have been Saville and Tomljanovic, both of which have had to battle back from injuries. Tomljanovic is playing at the moment, in a 250 event. Saville has had patchy form, but she has got her ranking back into double digits again, coming back from the torn ACL 12 months ago or so. So we'll watch out for them and maybe a couple of our youngsters to pop up. But again, we're not going to have huge expectations and maybe again look towards the grass court season.
Yeah, and I think it's just, they'll have the ability to play freely. They won't have any expectations on their shoulders. And if any of the Aussies are able to get through qualifying, a win or two would be great. But I don't think if we're going to be discussing the outrights, I don't think we're going to have too much more to say about it for this particular tournament.
Yeah, it's just looking at, hopefully they get a kind draw, whether they land, another qualifier or something like that. I mean, are there any dangerous floaters in the draw before we just look at some betting strategies? I look at Simona Halep, for example. Now, she hasn't played a lot lately due to that suspension that she had, but she is a Grand Slam winner in the past.
Mm-hmm.
She's 65s on the exchange at the moment. I don't think anybody expects huge things, but we also look at the comeback that Svitolina made after she had her first child, where she was in electric form when she returned, and maybe being fresh really helped her out. Simona Halep hasn't been injured, so she's been able to train and stay fit.
So she did have, I think it was some shoulder issues after. So she came back and then was struggling a bit with her shoulder, so tempered her comeback a little bit. It's hard to make a strong case here, I think, particularly, given she is so reliant on movement and rhythm, and she just hasn't played enough, I think, to be able to find that rhythm. I think if you look down again, I think it's the tricky thing as well, I guess, thinking to the second week in particular, if it's a bit wet, the roof's closed, it changes the dynamic of centre court so much as well that some of those bigger hitters, you get them in perfect conditions. Danielle Collins on a night session or a later evening session, with the roof closed, might be a little bit more difficult to match up with for some of the top players. Looking through, Sakari has had some success here in the past, but it's hard to be, too keen on her given the form coming in here. Andreeva, the teenager, is one to keep an eye on. But again, is she winning 7 matches here to be able to kind of push deep in the tournament? I probably wouldn't want to be near her in the early aspects of the draw. But then, there's no one that's really jumping off the page. But as I said, we can certainly pop some content up on the hub and on socials around the tournament overall, particularly once we have the draw out.
Yep, and that's sort of our segue into the final little point on that. What with the draw, what are you most looking for in terms of strategies that you want to play around, just so you can sort of point people towards what you might be looking at?
Yeah, I think looking, as I said, with those top four players in the men's in particular, I'm probably most interested in Djokovic's draw. I think if he can get a really favourable early draw, find some rhythm, I think he's going to be able to to be a threat here. And I wouldn't be surprised if that 420 does come in a little bit. So he might be one to maybe back at that 420, knowing that if he does turn up, he should be making the second week on his level and ability, and he should be on the centre courts, the better conditions. So he's probably the one that I'm keeping an eye on most out of those. And then, as I said before, of the three names that I mentioned of the best of the rest, it's probably still Casper Ruud and Alexander Zverev from a trading perspective. Going to need to probably keep a close eye, particularly on the couple of days before the tournament. Make sure there's no emergency press conferences or anything for any of the players. But if you do see that someone's going to be falling out, if they withdraw from the tournament before the tournament starts, then all bets on them will be void. So laying doesn't get you anywhere in that respect unless the tournament has started and they've played a match. So looking to some of the players maybe around them in the draw to back, knowing that they might come in, as that news starts to filter out a little bit. But yeah, I think Ruud and Zverev for those, and in the women's, I think looking at it, it's just wait and see what Iga's draw looks like. I think if you want a nice price on anyone else, you're probably going to get it. And we'll wait and see for that draw and make some comments then.
First time in more than a decade we can say value in the men's draw at the French Open, which is a real rarity. Steve, thanks for jumping on with us again. We look forward to your tips throughout the course of the tournaments, and you'll be venturing sort of somewhere over towards that part of the world in Europe to take in a bit of the tennis experience in the coming weeks. So good luck and enjoy that journey.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.